Voice of America was established in 1942 during World War II to broadcast pro-American news and information abroad, a vital service at one point. Initially overseen by the Office of War Information, it later moved under the U.S. Information Agency and then to the Broadcasting Board of Governors. This is the agency to which President Trump appointed Senate candidate and GOP star Kari Lake as special advisor. Citing rampant fraud, waste, and abuse, the Trump administration has since moved to dismantle the entire agency. 6 Voice of America journalists have sued Kari Lake and the Trump administration, claiming the shutdown of the U.S.-funded network was unconstitutional and violated their First Amendment rights. Over 900 full-time employees and 550 contractors were placed on indefinite leave as part of the move. VOA has a budget of roughly $270 million and has just over 2,000 employees. The plaintiffs argue that Voice of America and its parent agency, the U.S. Agency for Global Media, were improperly shuttered despite Congress continuing to fund them. Lawsuits have been filed seeking reinstatement of staff, a restoration of operations, citing the critical role the network plays in promoting free press worldwide. With us is President Trump's special advisor overseeing the U.S. AGM, Kari Lake. Kari, it's so good to have you in studio.
It's good to be with you again.
All right, demystify a few things here. I know there's a lot of misinformation surrounding this entire story. Tell us your top 3.
Well, it's interesting. As President Trump tries to reduce the bloat, the government bloat, the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C., it's been one lawsuit after the next, after the next, after the next. And if you ask the American people who fund all of this in Washington, D.C., they want the bureaucracy to be shrunk down. It's grown to levels that are just, frankly, not sustainable. We can't sustain this. And so President Trump put out an executive order on Friday, the 14th of March, late in the evening, and said that we need to take this agency, U.S. Agency for Global Media, and really boil it down to its statutory minimum. So, you know, if you've seen it before, I mean, if you followed the government at all, you'll see how an agency starts up, an outlet begins, and it continues to grow, 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 even when its mission has been accomplished. They never want to pare things down. They only want to ramp things up. So we're in the process of boiling things down to meet the executive order that President Trump signed on the 14th. And, you know, we're bringing people back. People have been on administrative leave. And as we continue to work and figure out what the statutory minimum is, we're bringing people back to meet that requirement by the President of the United States. For an example, the Office of Cuba Broadcasting, Radio Marti, they just started back up broadcasting once again, I believe today. And so we're watching, we're bringing things back together. But what we have to do is root out the fraud, the waste, the abuse that's happening. And this agency, there's a lot of corruption. We're finding that money is going to places it shouldn't be going to. And we're going to get lawsuits. This is just par for the course. We've been victim, President Trump has, I myself have, of lawfare. It's the same cast of characters who are coming over and trying to put landmines in the way of every step President Trump and this administration are trying to do to get this government back in line where we can actually afford it.
What you said just reminded me of, I think, a pattern of behavior that has been so baked into D.C. culture, and that is this idea that almost all actions are justified with this kind of blank checkism. Like they operate with this idea that they're given this blank check in the name of democracy. And this particular agency, I think, seems to be kind of a poster child of that attitude.
We need to modernize it for sure. I mean, if you look at the product that's been put out, we're doing 1990s TV in many cases. and there's some great people at the agency and at the outlets, Voice of America and many other outlets. But we've got to modernize it. Our adversaries are working on, they're doing the same thing where they're putting out their news that, you can call it propaganda if you want. It's sponsored by the government, but they're not doing 1990s style TV. They're doing things that are digital. You think that China is running 1990s style TV to try to sway Americans?
Well,
no.
For Pete's sake, the Taliban is way more advanced than
they're using TikTok and other things. So we want to modernize it. We want to make sure that the agency is actually in line with what our American values are. We're telling America's story. We're not telling our adversary's story. I mean, there's been I've seen instances where what we're putting out is more in line with our adversaries than with America. We should be somewhere in line with what our diplomatic policies are.
I think I remember that getting in trouble from the White House Correspondents Association for pointing that very fact out, and including there was a VOA reporter too who was also just essentially repeating the narratives from the CCP. And
remember, who's paying for this? It is the American taxpayer. You know, I am not a creature of D.C. As a matter of fact, there's some beauty here, and I'm really enjoying what I'm doing, but I don't want to be here forever. I'm thinking of the people back home. I'm thinking of the mom who's struggling to make ends meet. Dad's got to work 2 jobs. Mom has to go back to work. I'm thinking of the truck driver that works the overnight shift and is struggling to make ends meet, paying his taxes. I'm thinking of the farmer who is every season just hoping to get through. I'm thinking of the school teacher, the nurse. They're paying for this. And by God, we're not going to be putting out anti-American garbage.
What has been some of the more shocking examples that you have seen as you sift through the programs that we fund here?
That we definitely have issues with some of our grantees. We're watching where the money is going. You know, grantees are much like nonprofits that we're seeing. We're hearing a lot about the nonprofits. We saw it with USAID. And we have the same problem, fewer of them, but we have the same problem over at USAGM. We're funding these grantees, and we don't have the transparency we need. About half of our nearly $1 billion budget is funneled through USAGM. It's not going to VOA or Radio Marti. It's going into 5 different grantees, including Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia, Middle East Broadcasting, and a couple of others. And we lose the transparency of where the money is going once that happens. Yes, Congress gives us money, and people expect that it's going to Voice of America, Radio Marti, but it's actually going into these grantees, and they've made it very hard for us to see how they're spending the money. We know it's being funneled in many cases off to friends and possibly not even to what the mission is. And so we just want to make sure that we have accountability where the money's going. It's actually doing something. We're getting a deliverable for it, not just being told we are and say, believe us.
Well, to be clear, a grantee is a private entity, or what is a grantee? What is the profile of a typical grantee?
Well, it really is like a nonprofit. Okay. It's like a nonprofit, and you know, we have Radio Free Europe, Radio Free Asia. Right. A lot of these grantees were started, but they're duplicative of what we're doing. I mean, we're already through VOA doing reports to Asia, doing reports to reach the people in China. Why are we having the duplicative aspect of funding another grantee? And half of our budget is going into these grantees where there's no oversight. We just want to get a handle on where the money is going because, again, this is taxpayer money, American taxpayer money. And if there's a better way to do it, we should be looking for a better way to do it. And nobody's taken a look at this for so long. They've just let this agency go. It's been called, pound for pound, the most corrupt agency in Washington, D.C. That says a lot. I'm not privy to tell you everything that we're finding, but for me to say there's a serious rot here, and which I've been quoted as saying, I mean that. There's some serious rot, serious fraud and abuse that's going on in this agency, and it's not going to be happening on my watch.
Well, it was so apt when President Trump announced that you would be a special advisor in this role, because you have seen the industry from the side of a professional. You've been in this business, and so you know what it is to touch base with both the executives who make the news possible and the people to whom you serve in terms of the people that you share your stories with. So it must be very interesting to you, I think, from a career perspective, to be standing in this particular role now.
Well, I never, ever envisioned this. I didn't. But I haven't even gotten to the point where I'm talking editorial content. And for a lot of people, that's the concern. We just saw NPR, PBS this week being grilled for absolute abject failure that those 2 networks have become. And I haven't even gotten to looking at the content, because I'm right now looking at where's the money going.
The structure.
Where is the structure? And I'm not in the director position at VOA, which is where President Trump wanted me to be. Turns out during the Biden administration, that Trump proofed the agency to make it really hard for him to get his people in. They also, what we found out right before I got in the door, took all these grantees' contracts, reworked them in the past month to past year. They've reworked all the grantee contracts to make it so we have less transparency, less visibility on what they're doing. Why would they do that? We don't want less transparency. We want to know exactly where our taxpayer money is going. And when you take your budget that Congress has appropriated for you, and then you hide it over into these different grants, it makes it impossible for the American people to know what their money, what their hard-earned tax dollars are going to. So that's what we're doing right now. There's a ton of lawsuits coming. Every day I wake up with a new lawsuit. But what they don't realize is I've been there before. Yeah. I understand how the game is played, and we'll work through this. But we are not going to allow the bureaucracy to continue to grow in this country and bankrupt our country. The American people are working too hard. We love our country too much to let that happen.
Well, Godspeed on that. We have also this very interesting story, especially from the perspective of journalists, bubbling up, this whole Atlantic Signal Gate story. And it actually involves a little bit, it doesn't involve, the Signal Gate doesn't involve this person, but NPR CEO Catherine Marr, she's a board member of Signal. You have some very, very interesting players who seem to have very prominent positions in companies like Signal, in places like NPR, in places like Wikipedia. What are your thoughts on how the Atlantic has handled this story and how this general media landscape is taking this?
Well, you just mentioned the Atlantic, Wikipedia, Signal. I mean, it's very incestuous, isn't it? All these people.
And all those names, for example, there's one woman who's kind of, at the center at Catherine Marr.
I see it. By the way, and as we're looking for waste, fraud, and abuse in our grantees, I start looking at who's involved, who sits on the boards, and it's all like this web of some of the same people.
Right.
Getting a little money over here, getting money over here. This is how this whole place works. It's just one big pyramid scheme almost. But when it comes to that story, it's concerning that these people who obviously are very one-sided, very slanted to the left, are behind all of these different companies that we use and that many of us, have used over the past. I mean, I look at my Wikipedia page. It's a complete nightmare. I had to tell people, don't look at it. It's just full of lies. But that's how they operate.
You and me both. I think I'm still a conspiracy theorist for saying that the virus came out of a Wuhan lab.
Oh,
those are things that we still deal with as conservatives.
Even though we've been proven right. But, this whole story, and this is the reason we go back to President Trump's first term, and you were a big part of this. President Trump threw out the idea of saying, hey, what if we move our press into a bigger room so we can bring more people in, not just the usual mainstream media, but we want to bring some of the alternate media in that actually reach more people now. Right. And there was a huge pushback by the mainstream media. No, and it wasn't so much that they were opposed to moving to a big room. They don't want the alternative media, and they're asking questions that the people care about. So this Signal story, while it is deserving of a little bit of coverage, absolutely. Have you noticed, if you've been watching Caroline Leavitt in the press meetings, or the press pool, and the briefings, she's been getting one question after the next. Let me tell you, the American people want to have other questions asked, because they care about more than just that story. They may care about that story a little bit, but they want to also know what's happening with Doge, what's happening with our national security. How are things going on the border? Where are we when it comes to deporting the criminal element that has come in, especially during Joe Biden's administration? And if you notice, this is, I believe, a push by the mainstream media, Washington, D.C., to let them only beat this one drum and keep them only talking about this as a scandal, because they don't want to talk about the huge success that President Trump has already had, that this administration's had.
Yeah, the timing of it was highly suspect, especially it was just before these intel committees on both the Senate and the House were scheduled. I mean, that subsumed the conversation.
I think that Caroline Leavitt, should take a question on it a day and then move on and just say, I've already answered that question. Next, and hit with some of the reporters who actually want to ask the questions that people in this country want answers on.
It's an ongoing fight, and I might be concerned, at least from my perspective, is I fear that this administration may not be doing as much thinking on how to institutionalize some of the radical changes that we do want in the press corps and its coverage of our public institutions. I mean, right now it's monopolized in such a way, and I know you've seen this, it's monopolized in such a way that it truly does favor a very bias, an oversaturated leftist viewpoint, and it still does to this day. Even if we've invited new media in, they're still oversaturated in representation.
One new member of the media or a couple new, it's not going to do it. What I think needs to happen is that the White House needs to take control of the press room. And I think that it should be rotating. You know, I don't know how many seats there are. I'm guessing, what, 30?
64,
64, okay. And that should just be rotated every week, you know. And some weeks you're going to get to sit up front. Some weeks you're going to have to stand. But it should be rotated in and out.
Kari, take the seats out altogether, but that might be a little too radical for some people. But I'll keep working on it.
I'm glad you are. And it's very important that we get a fair media.
It is. And I love that you're in the fight. I love that you're in D.C. I know we've pulled you away from your beautiful Arizona, but I love that you're here in D.C. because we need more voices like you.
Thank
and
you.
More fighters like you. So it's an honor to have you back on. Thank you.
Thank you, Chanel, and thanks for being one of the honest ones out there. We need more voices like yours as well.
Keep up with the good fight.